Audits and Governmental Efficiency and Public Safety Committees. In fact, Greg Smith, Jack Weiss, Dennis Zine, Wendy Gruhl are present. We're here to continue the two committees' joint hearings into issues related to conduct and discipline at the fire department. And as a byproduct of our earlier consideration of the matter that is on the March ballot relating to the independent assessor position, we decided that we would hear some reports today regarding internally what the fire department was doing with respect to that position. We also decided, Mr. Weezar and myself, that we would ask for stakeholders to come today and tell us a little more about other related issues that relate to the disciplinary and investigatory systems at LAFD, and we're going to do that. Before we get to our presentation today, I know our city controller is here, Laura Chick. It was the controller's audit in and around the time of some rather interesting lawsuits that brought much of this to the fore. So, Ms. Chick, if you could please start us off, and then we will go through our staff presentations, and we also have one card.
Okay.
Good morning.
So,
Good
thank
afternoon,
you.
Whatever.
Thank you, council members. It was actually 3 years ago this month that I released an audit which painted a very troubling picture of the Los Angeles Fire Department. Our firefighters were not being well served by the leadership at the top, and we found an environment that tolerated harassment, hazing, and discrimination. One of the most important recommendations of the audit was for an independent assessor. And I'm very pleased that the council has put this on the ballot. But I'm hopeful that the council, the mayor, and the commission, before the public votes on this, will have finalized through open discussions such as the one you're having today, finalize and adopt what the job duties and powers will be, because that's very, very important in terms of what we're asking the public to vote on, is telling them the description of what this position is actually going to do. In May of this year, 2008. In May of 2008, we did a follow-up audit of the fire department. And what we saw was that new leadership at the top had helped to bring out significant changes and improvements, but that there were still some key areas that need to be addressed. So one clearly is this position and defining it. Another is about the disciplinary complaints continue to be investigated by captains who are on a rotational assignment and are permitted to work overtime in other fire department locations. This practice creates a revolving door and potential conflict of interest, as the captains may be interacting with other fire department members who are actually subjects of active investigations. So it was an original recommendation, and it's a recommendation in the follow-up audit of May 2008, that still the investigations are not being done by the right staff. And then a second issue is that the guidelines for discipline are still very, very broad, and it was a specific recommendation in the original audit that as much as possible, the range of discipline penalties be specified, because there had been very much perception, if not reality, that the discipline system in the fire department was not being applied in a fair manner, and that one of the ways to get rid of that perception and to ensure that discipline was being applied in a fair and consistent manner, that we were recommending that the penalty guidelines be very specific. For X offense, here are what the possibilities are for punishment or for discipline. And the follow-up audit found that these still were vague and very, very broad. So we reiterated some of the same recommendations in the 2008 follow-up. Some of these, I think, rely on resources, and I guess that's also very much up to the council and mayor to determine what resources are available to give to the fire department so that it can fully and appropriately staff the discipline and investigation piece of this. And I guess I would reiterate what I said in the cover letter of the follow-up audit. Forget even the exceedingly hard times we're facing. Resources are always scarce, and disciplining and investigating inside the fire department is not an essential constituent service. So it's understandable it's not a top priority to fund, but at the same time, we've been bleeding taxpayer dollars at the back end. And I guess I've been watching this for 16 years, and the attempts on the part of the council and the personnel committee back in the 90s to address this. So I guess I'm convinced that without the resources and without completing this process, that we don't solve the problem, and that we end up spending money in the worst way, which is in lawsuits and settlements. So those are my comments, and thank you.
Are there questions for the controller, Ms.
I have
Krul?
a quick question on that. The May follow-up audit that you performed, did the department respond to, it sounded like there were three major issues. One, this independent auditor, but two other issues that you outlined as far as the discipline and the use of
They responded, and what I have in my hand is our response to their response,
Okay.
and we're still pushing and taking issue on those two things that I've said.
And is that before the commission or?
You know, I'm not sure, and I know the president of the commission is here.
Okay.
I'm not sure where these things have gone since this letter was written September 30th, 2008.
Okay.
This was my auditor's response to the fire department's response
To the
to the
main.
follow-up audit, right?
Yeah.
So we're still saying, and you know, on the piece about captains doing the investigation, Chief Berry and I have discussed this. I mean, he would be more than happy to have a fully staffed civilian unit, but he doesn't have those resources, so he's making the best of with
And
what
I
he
know- I
has.
mean, you talk
We're
about
saying it's they're not there yet.
Well, and I think the choices we have to make sometimes, though, are if some of the lawsuits that we've had could have been avoided, so you look at the cost-benefit ratio, and so I think that's important to look as we go forward.
And I don't know what we're up to on. I know there's still lawsuits going on, but I mean it's
Millions.
It's many millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So
So maybe one of the things we can ask Mr. Weiser on the Audits Committee is to get a response back from
On the follow-up.
on the follow-up audit on those couple of items with the fire department represented here to respond to those two specific.
Other questions for the controller?
Okay.
Well, thank you for coming and for your continued interest and pursuit of the issue. Thank you, Ms. Chick. Next, we have commissioners, staff from the fire department, staff from the city. Anyone in the city, in the staff or commission world, please come forward. Okay, our commission president. See, I heard you were here, Ms. Hayes. I didn't see you, but in fact, you're here. No, it just I hadn't. You had a cheap seat, and
There are no cheap seats now, are there really, in this room? Okay. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over most of the presentation to B. Lopez, who is the staff person, the commission staff person who's been working with personnel on the job specs for the independent assessor. What I can say to you, though, thus far is we actually have been working very closely with and very collaboratively with the personnel department and with the CLA's office. And I believe that what we have now is we have a first draft. Phyllis is here. There's no chair for her, but and actually June Gibson is here.
Get some,
someone can bring a chair
Let
for
me see.
them. That'd be nice.
You know what?
the cheapest seats, they have no seat.
So we're either in the cheap seats or no seats. Is that it?
Well, if CLA can help folks sit down, that'd be nice. And while they're doing that,
Rotate.
this is just the most fun people have had at a committee hearing in a long time.
These are the guys.
Well, while they're doing that, if we could let
They Leave it up to your fire guy. And these are the
All right.
rules. They can't even figure out how to get the seated.
I know. That's right.
There's a problem here.
Fireman saves the day.
Can't even line up the chairs.
So, Ms. Lopez, why don't we ask you to begin, and then we'll ask. Is there anyone else from? Or is it just? It's just commission here. It's not LAFT today, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
As you can see, the commission advocates an inclusive process. And so we followed that model and included several meetings and all the stakeholders with regard to the class specifications and the job description. There was consensus. We started writing the class specs with our good friends from the personnel department, and I'm happy to report that we have a proposed final draft as of this morning. It's ready to go as soon as the voters tell us what their will is in March. We expect that after the election, the agenda for the Civil Service Commission would carry this item, unless Personnel Department tells me something different. And so essentially we've done a lot of preliminary work. We're waiting for the voters to tell us what direction to take finally. And there, as I said before, there was consensus from the stakeholders, from management, from the personnel department with regard to the class specs.
And one thing that we had asked, we being public safety and I believe audits, and certainly other council members, both while we were in committee and while we were in full council, which we had asked was that that the development of this final version take into account the views of the stakeholder groups, and I take it you have done that?
We have done that. We've taken several meetings to do that, and the product that you have before you is a result of that participation from the stakeholders.
Is it an agreed-upon consensus document?
Yes, yes it is.
Great. Well, any questions for Ms. Lopez about the contents of the job description? Just in terms of what it says, not what it should or shouldn't say, but just does everyone understand what it says?
And you've I know in the notes it said there were some minor changes you were still working on. Is this a complete document now?
The one minor change Councilwoman Brewer was taking care of this morning. There was one bullet that was left for us to go back with the stakeholders and with the personnel department. We got that resolved this morning.
Which one was that due?
It had to do with the need for the independent assessor to have conflict resolution and mediation skills. And the personnel department, and we agreed with them, believed that we could raise that question, or that question could be raised as people were being interviewed. One of the reasons that was in there was because we believe that while the independent assessor would not be doing conflict resolution or mediation themselves, we wanted to make sure that we had a candidate who was familiar with and could identify should there be an issue that they believed would in fact lend itself to conflict resolution or mediation as a way of de-escalating things. But you know, when we looked at it, and when I talked with B and she talked back and forth with Phyllis from personnel, that's something that we believe, as they believe, that we can get at, and they will be able to get at as we begin to look at resumes.
So you'll take that out of
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, just as I look at the qualifications on the list and knowledge of, are any of these weighted differently, or are they just, these are recommended criteria? Because if you find this person that does all this, they're superhuman. They really are.
Well, the class spec is supposed to be broad and
Yeah.
descriptive. We're not going to find the person who can
Right.
do all of it.
Yeah.
And so when the selection process begins, there will be some decisions made about which is more valuable and which will be weighted, and how
it'll be weighted.
Yeah.
and how it'll be
Okay,
weighted.
okay.
Ms. Gibson, is there anything that you want to tell us that we haven't heard from everybody else?
Our involvement was to ensure that everybody is happy at the end, and since everybody's happy at the end, our office is very happy with the process.
Oh, that is the best description of the CLA's office I think I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can start
But
putting that as a tagline on every
It's
report.
the Department of Happiness. Okay.
But I want to note
Anybody
for
else?
the committee that June Gibson, just from my perspective, was very helpful to me as a commissioner in working with me and talking to me and explaining things to me so that we could get this thing on track. So I think she's being a bit, she's underplaying her role a bit, and I want to make sure that people do understand that she provided a lot of support to the commission office, to B, but most particularly to me, because I'm an outsider.
Commissioner Harley, let me tell you, Ms. Gibson always underplays her role.
Okay.
But anyone who works in this area knows that they underplay her role at their
Okay.
peril.
I just wanted to make sure that I was not guilty of that as well. I think it's important when people make a significant contribution that you make sure that you acknowledge that contribution.
And I certainly want to echo that statement. We've been on this for about a year now, and she's held this together all the way through and certainly educated the Audit Committee on this and made sure we kept on track. So just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any questions for the folks at the table right now? Okay, well, if you guys could hang out for 1 second, we've got a card from Mr. McCosker. Mr. McCosker, if you could come forward, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just
Mr.
one
Smith.
question for Phyllis. Are we waiting till the charter issues approved before we begin circulating?
Yes, we are. We are. We have a draft of a recruitment plan that we'll go over with the commission, and we'll work very closely with them.
So you'll be ready, but you'll be ready to post it within
right away.
30 days after.
And remember, I mean, what the charter amendment does, if it passes, is it puts this position in the line of authority of the commission rather than the department. So that's why you would wait to circulate it until the voters have decided whether it will be something that will position that will report exclusively to the commission and not through the chain of command to the chief. Even though it was never going to report to the chief, the charter amendment moves it so that it's clear. Thank you. Mr. McCosker, thank you for coming.
Thank you, council members. Pat McCosker, President, United Firefighters of Los Angeles City, again. Thanks for having me today. I wanted to come up here and first of all, verify what I heard our commission president say, and that is that they tried to be inclusive about this. They haven't just tried, they've succeeded. They've been very inclusive every step of the way. From the moment that the controller issued her audit of our department, they've been inclusive about how we've responded to it. And this is one of the recommendations that was made in the controller's audit that I supported then, and I support now the creation of this position. I support also the position description that we very inclusively developed together. And I kind of want to go on record again and remind you, if you don't remember, that right from the start, we as an organization supported the controller's audit, the findings and the recommendations that she made. We appreciate, the hard look, especially at the discipline system that we had. I agree that it wasn't fair. It was biased. There were problems that needed to be addressed. So this recommendation, I think we're moving down the right path on. I have some concerns, and it sounds like they were shared, perhaps by the controller, about a couple of other audit recommendations and how in the last 2 years we've responded. And by the way, it hasn't. I think a couple of things have gone sideways. I don't think it's been through any lack of inclusiveness or bad intention on anyone's part. A lot of good people worked very hard on this, and I appreciate all that they did. I think some of it is things that couldn't be foreseen. Some of it is because of lack of funding. Some of it is because the local union, I think, took the wrong position, unfortunately, regarding how we ought to respond. But if I may, the 3 areas that I have of real concern that I hope that we can look at again and continue to work on, and 2 of them were already expressed. The opinion was already expressed, I believe, by the controller, and that is that the guidelines really are overly broad. Guidelines are a great idea. You need guidelines so that people know what the offenses are, what to expect, if they make that mistake, if they cross that line. And you also want them to be reasonably narrow, broad enough that where there are mitigating factors, you can reduce the penalty, and where there aren't, you can make sure it's appropriate. But if they're so broad, as they are right now, I believe, then you allow favoritism, to happen where it will, and that's our past history here. We've have had a lot of favoritism with regards to how discipline is meted out. We've had people get a slap on the wrist for an offense, and then another person for the same type of offense gets the book thrown at them. That's what we want to not have happen anymore. I also want you to know, as I describe this, that the union wants an orderly, disciplined fire department as much or more than anybody, any of the stakeholders. We want the fire department our behavior to reflect well on our department and on ourselves, believe me. So I want this to come out right. But I think to have it come out right, we need more narrowing down of the penalties prescribed in the guidelines, and I hope we get a chance to work on that in the future. The second thing is the recommendation that the controller made that it not be folks in the chain of command doing the investigating of firefighters who are then perhaps working with those same firefighters. Well, guess what? Because of probably a lack of funding, we've gone the wrong direction. We've exacerbated that problem tenfold because we just finished yesterday with the training of every fire captain in how to be that investigating officer, that primary investigator. And that's what they're now doing. They're mandated to do. When a complaint comes in against a firefighter in a fire station, that captain that lives and works with that firefighter is the primary investigator who is tape recording an interview, giving a Liebarger admonition, filling out detailed reports, and making recommendations. It's a horrible situation because it ends up pitting these people that are living together against one another, and it's something that I believe the controller recommended against, and we've had to, unfortunately, I shouldn't say we've had to, but what's come of this is that's where we're at now, and I think that the department would tell you it's because they don't have enough resources to do these investigations with people that are strictly in that PSD chain of command. And then the third thing that I would ask you to look at with us is the fact that we've had a real explosion in the numbers of these investigations. They're about fourfold now of what they were during my last term as president. And it's good that we're investigating those things that need to be investigated, but part of the problem is that we're investigating anonymous complaints now. There's a capability in this discipline tracking and complaint making system that's now online to make a complaint that's completely anonymous, with no repercussions. Some of them are probably being made by firefighters against one another now, unfortunately. I hate to admit that. But they're all being investigated like major discipline cases, and it just seems to me that a principle of fairness in this country ought to be the ability to at least know who the accuser is, if not face your accuser, but to know who the accuser is. And that isn't the case right now, and I think we set up an unfortunate situation. So I hope those three things we can continue to collaboratively, work toward. But I got to say, I appreciate very much what the Fire Commission has done on this whole subject, and also what the controller did for our department when she audited it.
Let me say, colleagues, by way of framing where I think we go from here, both in terms of this afternoon and in the future. First, I think you all feel the same way I do, that we feel very good that everyone today has spoken with one voice with respect. And I'm not talking about the merits of a matter that's on the ballot, because it's on the ballot, it's for the voters to decide, but everyone has spoken with one voice with respect to the process and the outcome for the specific duties for that independent assessor. And that is a good thing, and that's real progress. And I think I think there was some trepidation, or at least a little hesitation on the part of many of us several months ago about whether that would in fact occur. And no doubt a lot of that is due to the fact that you, Mr. McCosker, have just jumped back into this with, both feet, and you have engaged just as collaboratively with the department and the governmental representatives as they have with you. So that's a good thing. And then what I would offer by way of framing, colleagues, with respect to the issues that Mr. McCosker has just identified with respect to the discipline system, they strike me as important and worthy of discussion. And it seems to me that what I would like to do would to be not dispose of them today and just say thank you for your comments, Mr. McCosker, but to schedule a follow-on hearing at which we can have a more in-depth discussion about these issues and give everyone the chance to come in and identify their views about those issues at some point in the future, so we can have a full discussion, because they do seem to me to be serious issues. That would be my suggestion to everybody, but why don't we hear whether folks have questions or comments for Mr. McCosker or for any of the other folks who came. Ms. Gruhl?
No, I think that was with looking at what the controller had and adding on to that was what to have it come back and do a report. So
Is there any questions? So I guess what I would say then, and joint hearing be, if you would like, Mr. Weezar, would be that we schedule a follow-on hearing to address. I'm just trying to think of how to address issues relating to the disciplinary process within the fire department. And we'll ask for the fire department, the commission, the controller's office, if they care to engage, the CLA and the employee organizations to come and present their views on the issues that Mr. McCosker's identified and any other current issues relating to the disciplinary system, so that there can be a full discussion of those. And perhaps by scheduling that hearing, we can, oftentimes what happens is then the different groups will have the chance to talk and exchange ideas and, maybe come up with a new way of doing things.
I think that's appropriate, Mr. Weiss, considering that we have come a long way since the controller initially put out her report. Just because we've got this on the ballot for March and there's been some other movement on this, it doesn't mean that it's over. We've got to keep our eye on this and move forward. There's a lot more work to be done on it, and I think that's appropriate.
Are there any questions for Mr. McCosker then? Well, thank you for that. We'll do that in the future. Are there any other questions on the item, colleague? It was a report. It wasn't an action item because this is a job description that will be circulated, perhaps, but it certainly won't be circulated unless the measure passes in March. So if not, we will continue this item until we schedule the follow-on hearing that will delve more specifically into disciplinary process issues at the fire department. So that concludes the public safety part of the meeting. You're on your own.
We'll continue with that.
Okay, cool.
You guys want to hang out? You want to?
You got signed.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to leave this on.
Okay.
Yeah, Greg and me.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Weiss and Mr. Smith, on that item, very important item, and we'll wait to see the outcome in March. We're going to continue the agenda for the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee and continue to be joined by Councilwoman Gruhl and Councilmember Zine. At this time, we will take up items 2, 3, and 4 collectively, and if our clerk could read off those items so that the public is aware of what we're discussing.
Item number 3 is the Controller's Report relative to the audit of Quimby fee collections and uses. Item number 3, is Department of Recreations and Parks Report in response to motion relative to the status of Quimby fee collections in each council district. And item number 4 is discussion of a recently released needs assessment by consultants Mealair and Associates.
Excellent. Thank you, and we'll take those items up together. And if we could ask is the Controller's Office here to report on, give a summary of the report. And then we'll take up, there's personnel here from Rec and Parks, I believe.
Rick Degucci, Controller's Office.
You're welcome.
Our audit report was issued in February 2008. At the time of the audit, the department had a balance of about $129 million in the Quimby Fund. In terms of collections, they varied widely from year to year. For example, in fiscal year 2001-2002, collections were $2 million. For fiscal year 05-06, they were $43 million. The audit had 4 different objectives. First of all, we wanted to validate collection figures on RAPS reports that they were presenting to council. We wanted to verify that Quimby funds were being used for eligible expenditures. We wanted to determine whether fees were properly calculated and collected and evaluate oversight and internal controls over the Quimby program. We covered fiscal year 2002, 2003 through January 2008. In terms of our expenditure test work, it focused mainly on Council District Number 9. In terms of our results, we did not note any ineligible Quimby expenditures, but we did note some problems. I'll go through some of them. First of all, fees were calculated incorrectly, resulting in overcharges of about $4.5 million since 2004. The new fee each year is supposed to be calculated by determining a percentage change in real estate index published by the Real Estate Research Council of Southern California. So, for example, in one case, the index was increased from 233 to 248, which is an increase of 15 points. So the planning department increased the fee by 15%, but it should have been increased by 6.4% by taking the 15 and dividing by the base index of 233. So of the 4 years that we looked at, we found calculation errors in 2 years, which resulted in the $4.5 million in overcharges. Secondly, the department did not have a comprehensive plan to use the Quimby funds. The lack of the comprehensive plan resulted in the large balance accumulating in the fund and not being used for park projects. For example, in Council District 9, only $1 million of the available $12 million in funds were spent over the last 5 years. The department did have a draft of an open space plan. The plan identifies Quimby as a funding source, along with other sources such as Proposition 40, Proposition K, Proposition 1C. However, the plan does not specify how the Quimby funds will be leveraged with these other sources to meet the shortfalls of city or shortfalls of open space in the city. Some of the Quimby codes and procedures appear to be outdated and in need of revisions. A lot of the ordinances and guidelines were developed in the 1970s and 1980s. Some of the requirements have resulted in difficulties in planning projects and spending the funds. For example, one rule stipulates that the funds can only be spent on projects that are within 2 miles from the development that generated the fees. And then lastly, we found that controls need to be strengthened to ensure accurate figures reported to stakeholders. The department was not reconciling its collection database to FMIS on a regular basis. And as part of our sample, we identified a $211,000 payment that was posted in FMIS but not posted in its collection database. We also noted 2 collections totaling $165,000 that were posted as collections for one council district but actually belonged to another council district. We recently performed an evaluation of the planning department's response. They had reported 3 out of 4 recommendations implemented, and based on our desk review as part of our follow-up process, we accepted those recommendations. So the 3 recommendations that have been implemented are related to the calculation of the fees. So we verify that planning is now charging the correct fee. In terms of recreation and parks, we received their response yesterday. They had reported 2 recommendations as implemented and 3 as partially implemented. And probably the end of this week or beginning of next week, we'll be contacting the department to obtain support documentation for those statuses.
Okay, thank you very much. If you could remain up here as well, we're going to call up now the Rec and Parks for a response to the Controller's report, and also, I guess we could hear afterwards on the needs assessment from you as well.
Good afternoon. Mike Shaw. I'm the Superintendent of Planning and Development for Recreation and Parks. The Quimby program falls under my management portion of the department. Many of the items that were found in the audit, we didn't necessarily dispute many of the findings. The simple fact of the matter is that we went through, and it was mentioned by the controller staff, that the city went through a growth spurt, and we basically had one person assigned in the department to handle the Quimby program. In 2003, when development really took off, that's when we started seeing Quimby fees increased and a lot more money coming into the department. Prior to that, there was roughly only a balance of around $20 to $25 million. In 2003 is when it started to really increase. We recognized in the year 2005 that it was becoming more of an issue. I could personally tell because at the end of about the May of every year, I started seeing lines going basically out of our floor and into the elevator, into downstairs for people coming in to pay their fees at the last minute before they went up for the next year. It was an amazing time. I mean, it was just an influx of cash into the department that we had never seen before. We went from 2003, about $106 million was collected of that $120-odd million that was stated. Of that, about $80 million was collected since May of 2006. So The money, most of the money came in from roughly around May of 2006. We started to implement some changes in the system in how we did business with Quimby in 2006. And how did we do that? We went about automating our systems. We went about, we knew that we need to bring, we basically went from a usable database to something that, but it was required a lot of manpower to run, a lot of labor resources to do it. A lot of it was hand done. So we started and implemented in 2006 a geographic information system, which basically geocoded all of our parks and allowed us to import data from planning, who generates the case numbers for these developments that pay money, that would allow us to then quickly do radius searches of where the money could go and how we could plan on using it. That was a big change. The department reorganized some of our priorities that year to allow us to self-fund that money because we knew how important it was that we get organized and automate our systems. We never really received additional staff for the program, so the best way for us to go about doing it was just to automate it to make it easier for the small staff that we had to use it. I did want to mention a couple of things before. I want to get into what we call our Quimby tracking system, because it's basically the biggest thing that we've implemented since the audit, and had started actually implementing the system prior to the audit, but it is now complete and operating. But a couple unique things about Quimby that I just want to reiterate. Quimby is required, there's two things that go along with Quimby. Not every development pays Quimby fees. So apartment buildings don't pay Quimby fees. It's mainly subdivisions and zone changes, and in our city that basically translates to condominiums. So, a lot of misconceptions is that, all these developments are paying Quimby money. That's not true. It's only the subdivisions and zone changes that pay Quimby fees. Two, our enacting ordinance requires, which is basically part of the city's general plan, requires that Quimby money be spent within 2 miles of the area of where it was collected. So, and that only applies to community type parks, and community type parks are defined by the city's general plan, which is in part of the city's recreation plan, states that community parks have to be of a certain size, they have to have a certain types of amenities to qualify as a community park. So you're limited again on how far that money can reach, because the city's general plan further states that parks that are defined as neighborhood parks can only use money that were within 1 mile of where it was collected. So, it's not, people like to use 2 miles, 1.5 miles. It's really defined as 2 miles and 1 mile. 2 miles for community parks, 1 mile for neighborhood parks. So you're looking at a fee that's paid that's geographically restricted. So coming up with a comprehensive plan for the park system is much needed, but Quimby is only one part of the solution. Quimby is, we started doing our planning process around the areas where the money was generated to ensure that money was spent in the area that it was generated from, for one, but it was, we couldn't use the money anywhere else. So with that, I want to spend most of the time going through the Quimby tracking system, because it's really this new system is actually goes through and pretty much answers most of the questions that came out of the recommendations from the controller's audit. So with that, I'll turn it over to Daryl Ford.
Can I ask one question, only because I apologize, I'm going to have to leave in a minute.
Want to use this?
One question related to the changing, we have to go to the state to change that 2 miles and 1 mile, correct?
No, actually, that's incorrect. The state only says that you have to spend the money within a reasonable distance, but the state further says that every city that does choose to use the Quimby law, they have to enact their own ordinance. The city has chosen, and it's old, it's from the 70s, that it defines it as the 2 mile and the 1 mile. So we could change that.
So we could just revisit. And again, there's good reason for, if you have development in your
Yes.
neighborhood and are impacted and you're park poor, but there are probably other areas of the city which, and there has to be some nexus, and I understand that's for the city attorney. But
Right.
I guess then the question would be what's the next step in revisiting that, if we want to, at least to be able to have a policy discussion about it.
Right. Peter Echeverria from the City Attorney's Office. And I think that Mike, that the department is doing the correct, together with planning, I think, are undertaking the necessary review and studies to see what that limit can be expanded to. But it's simplistic to say that the city can change that. It's not entirely discretionary with us. The whole premise behind the Quimby fee is that it is to mitigate the impacts of the development, and that it's to benefit that specific development, and therefore it has to relate to the location of the development and the people who live there. That's why there needs to be some kind of study that factually supports the distance at which you will spend it, and that the 2 miles and the 1 mile was arrived at through a study that planning conducted, as I recall, through an outside consultant. That's
in
right.
1970.
That's
I
right.
think that if you look at now in different parts of our city, that there may not be possible to build a park in that neighborhood, but there's a regional park that is close by that would be utilized by the people who are impacted by the development. So I guess
Absolutely, there may be that, and we may
time
need
to review it. I think is that
I think it's time to review that. Also, the requirement that it be a local park versus other types of parks. Now there's more use of pocket parks as well.
Right.
We may have more flexibility in the types of uses that we make of the funds rather than the distance as well. Again, the distance needs to be justified ultimately by the use that the residents of that development will make of the park, not just.
So they can't say you're just taxing us for the rest of the city. And
Exactly. If it were a tax, then it would be different. Since it's a development fee, then it's different.
Are we on a process to revise those codes, or?
My understanding is that Rec and Parks, together with planning, have undertaken the necessary review and studies to try and revise that.
And so again, what is the status of that or timeline? And
if I could ask City Planning, and I know they're here, to come up. Actually, City Planning is in charge of making those the changes to the code.
Okay.
I believe they've had some changing of priorities, so I'm not sure where they're at in the process. We've had a number of meetings with planning. I know Alan Bell was here. Alan? While we're waiting on Alan, I did want to mention one other thing in regards to the point that was made by Councilmember Gruhl. The CD9, which was looked at under the audit, is a perfect example of you had a tremendous amount of money generated in the downtown area. But because of the restrictions, we're basically bound by areas surrounding downtown. The reason why that balance grew so much was just because it was obvious. Everybody saw all the development that was going on, the condo conversions that happened over a period of 4 years. But the price, well, until now, the price at that time for land downtown was extraordinary, and there wasn't nearly enough money at any one time to buy more than one piece of property in the downtown area, but most of it was already owned, and there was an interest in selling the property because it was more lucrative to develop it than it was just to sell it outright. We had a very difficult time. Right now, we're in a much better position, and we're actually getting very, very close to closing some deals and spending that money in the downtown area. So, Alan?
Yes. Alan Bell, Senior Planner, City Planning Department. We have been working very cooperatively with the Recreation and Parks Department to review those provisions of the Quimby Code that are an impediment to the effective utilization of these funds. As the City Attorney explained, we don't have absolute discretion in terms of where we can spend these funds. There has to be a reasonable relationship between the point of collection, the project site, and then the parks that are actually funded by that. So people have to have, that are paying for this and contributing toward the cost of these parks, they have to benefit from it. If we're going to expand the service radii for neighborhood parks or community parks, it has to be supported by a study. And the study that we do have available to us that we can draw upon that is the needs assessment that Recreation and Parks has been conducting in the last few months. So we can draw upon that data and that resource to consider expanding that. We would also probably have to, at the same time, amend the city's general plan to make sure that those standards are consistent with any kind of new policy, because the Quimby policy has to be consistent with and implement the city's general plan, which drives the policy in terms of where parks are going to go. What we're looking at is to have a code amendment and a corollary general plan amendment within the next 6 months before the City Planning Commission, so by the end of the second quarter of this year.
Okay. Would that need to come council as well after the Planning Commission? Yes, right?
Absolutely. Both of those are legislative actions, both the general plan amendment and the code amendment. After the commission takes action and reviews those, then it would then go forward to the Planning and Land Use Management Committee.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else you want to?
No, I'll turn it over to Daryl to run through our tracking system.
Good afternoon again. Daryl Ford from Recreation and Parks Department. Just going to take a brief walkthrough through the Quimby tracking system. If you have questions that go along, of course, feel free to jump in. To put it simply, essentially the Quimby tracking system is a planning tool that the department uses to track where collections are made, where allocations are made by the board, and where projects are. It also has a function where we can track the status of projects to see where they're at in their stage, construction, completed. So it kind of gives us the ability to not only follow Quimby collections from where they're collected to where they're actually allocated, spent, and then when projects are approved. So it's an excellent planning tool that has really enabled us to be a lot more successful and efficient at allocating and expending the Quimby fees. So I'm going to go through relatively quickly, walk through the Quimby tracking system just to give you an idea of kind of what it's able to do and how we use it in every day. The Quimby tracking system is available on our intranet, so the access to it is very quick. I've kind of highlighted there where it says CATS, is CATS. But essentially, from all of our desktops, we can access into the Quimby tracking system and log in. And what you see essentially when you first log in is you can see over there on the right side, the highlighted box is the Quimby tracking system. It has a data management portion and then a kind of reports function. I'm going to go into that again, just a little bit of detail, but just to give you an idea of how the system works. So in this instance, I would just click on the data management section and go in to look at the Quimby collection and allocation data. So there's three key things that the Quimby tracking system can do. It can track by facility. That can either be projects or collections. It can track by project, so by projects in each facility, and it also tracks the collections themselves. So it gives us easy access to all the pertinent kind of information we need in order to push Quimby projects forward. So I'm going to walk through each of them individually, starting off with how you would track something through the facility function. And again, just right off the desktop here, I would simply on the left side of the screen click on facility, and it would either give me a list of all the department's facilities, or I could manually input the facility that I'm looking for. So to see that, this is the next slide kind of shows that a list of department facilities. And you can see here again, it has 265 records, so it shows most of the department's primary parks. Here, I've highlighted towards the bottom of the screen Robert Burns Park. So in this example, if I wanted to look at a project at Robert Burns Park, I would just click on that selection there, click on the details section, and it would tell me everything I need to know about Robert Burns Park. So I'll just go ahead and move forward. This is the Robert Burns Park entry. It essentially shows the account summary telling us how many dollars are at Robert Burns Park. It tells us all the projects that are at Robert Burns Park, regardless if they're complete, if they're in development, if they're under construction. And it can show us essentially the data that goes in. It shows us all the projects that are available and shows how we can allocate and expend that money. So here at Robert Burns Park, let's say I wanted to look at the outdoor improvement project, the one I've highlighted towards the bottom of the screen. It says it's currently underway. So here again, I would just click on the details slide, and this would tell me everything I needed to know about the outdoor improvement project at Robert Burns Park. It would tell me all the Quimby allocations, where they came from, what collections, when they were allocated, the board approval that allocated them. It tells me the scope of the project, the percent complete, the project status. It essentially gives me all the information I need to know about the Quimby project here, again, the outdoor improvement project at Robert Burns Park. And that's essentially what is available for every facility and every park and every project that we have. So I'll run through an example again, just looking at the project function. Here we are back at the main data management screen. So same fashion. On the left side of the screen, you can simply click on project. You get an entire list of every project the department's working on. Regardless if it's a new project, it's the project that's in bid and award, if it's a project that's complete, if it's any project that has included Quimby fees in that project, it's right here on this screen. So in this example, I've highlighted 6th and Gladys Park. We have an outdoor park improvement project there. So you could simply click on that, and again, it takes us right back to that project detail screen that we were at before. Just another way of getting there. But essentially, once again, we can kind of see all the actions that took forth at 6th and Gladys Park. You can see the funds that were allocated to it, when they were allocated, and what the status of the project is. Moving forward, the last one I want to show you is the collection function. On the right side of the screen, number 3. this was the way we go through the system and look at all the collections we have in the Quimby tracking system. So I would click on that tab, and here, again, it's simply a list of every collection that we have in the system. I could look through by collection, by payee name, by address, by a number of functions. But here I've highlighted just one particular track. If I wanted to look and see information about that check or that collection and see where it went or how it was used, just simply click on the detail to get more detail about it, and there it is. It has all the details about the case number. It tells me who paid, when they paid, where they're located, how much they paid, and ultimately it tells me where that money was spent, or allocated to, where it was allocated to or earmarked for. So all the information about any particular collection can be tracked through the Quimby tracking system. The last two things we want to go through is how we use the Quimby tracking system to identify funding for projects, both at existing facilities and at proposed facilities. For existing facilities, it's actually very easy, and this is the wonderful thing about the Quimby tracking system and the way that it's been kind of integrated with our GIS system. Here we are back at the facility details screen. If there was a proposed project, again, we're at Robert Burns Park. At Robert Burns Park, on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you see a little highlighted area which says Add Project. I would simply click on Add Project, include whatever the project details are, the proposed scope, construction dates, any estimates we may have, and then it would take me to this screen here. And this is kind of the key screen that you want to see for the Quimby tracking system. This tells me all the collections within 1 or 2 miles of that park and that project. So right here in this screen, we can set aside the funds we need ultimately for board approval for this project. So all the collections within 1 mile and all the collections within 2 mile are listed right here. So we know for every existing facility, all collections within 1 and 2 mile in the database. So that's how we would do it. It's literally that simple for projects at existing parks. For projects for proposed facilities, it's a little bit different, but it kind of exposes what's going on behind the Quimby tracking system and the GIS system. For this one, since the facilities are not already in our database, we'd actually have to use GIS to do a radius search of 1 or 2 miles to see those collections that could go to this project. This one, I believe, is the Old Cypress Library. And we did a 1 and 2 mile sweep around Old Cypress Library to see how many Quimby collection points fell within those radius and how much of that money was available. So this is essentially how we would do it if a stakeholder asked, or if a council office asked, or anybody wanted to know, could we spend Quimby fees at X location or X park or X whatever it might be. So this is how we would do it using the GIS system. What we would get from that is just a very simple output on Excel. It would tell us within a 1 mile radius how much is available, and within a 2 mile radius how much is available. It gives us all the information about those collections, when they were collected, how much they were for, and tell us if those collections were already earmarked or allocated somewhere to another project or another park, or if they were available to be spent on this proposed project. And once we have this data, we sit down and we decide if this is a project we want to move forward. We would go right back into the Quimby tracking system and where we were at before and add the project back in, or add the facility or the proposed acquisition. It's pretty much all we'd have to do. The final piece we want to talk about with the Quimby tracking system is using it to track collections in the project allocations. Now, the Quimby tracking system has, in the right-hand side where we went to data management, also has a reports function, and that's what the reports function is going to do. It gives us the ability to look kind of top level at all the information in the Quimby tracking system. Dollars collected, allocated. It gives us an idea of the total number of projects. So there's a variety of reports we can print out of the Quimby tracking system. And again, the same versions that you saw on each of the screens and for each of the facilities are the types of reports we can build out of the Quimby tracking system. And just to kind of give a summary of what those reports generate here, what you can see is from July 1, 2003 to January 2nd, 2008, the Quimby tracking system shows a top-level number of collections. In this case, it's $118 million. And it also shows allocations of $61 million. So we can use those report functions out of the Quimby tracking system to get an idea globally of how we're doing on the Quimby program, but also at a facility, project, or council district level. However we may choose to report that data, ultimately, we can do in that function.
And just lastly on the, what we've done for, as a tool for the community is we basically roll this information up into a report, which is on our website, which is we publish this quarterly. We actually email it to all of your staff on a quarterly basis, and it's by council district, so it shows exactly all the information that Daryl was. It summarizes all that information into your district. We're still doing some changes to this document to make it a more usable document because we hadn't had a report like this before, but it is a very valuable tool that the community can get access to it. Everybody can see exactly how much money there is, what projects have been added, what's been completed, what's the status of projects, and so on and so forth.
And this is all available to the public in terms of what's on the internet. That's intra.
What we do is we freeze that information
You
on a
freeze it
quarterly
there.
basis in this report, which makes it available to the
Okay.
community.
All right.
But they don't actually.
You don't
People can't go in and actually
Yeah,
run
okay.
the different scenarios.
Regina Adams, Executive Officer of Recreation and Parks. I just wanted to add one thing here. Even though we have over $100 million in Quimby funds, all of this that you've just seen as far as the Quimby tracking system and also, too, the staff that we use to do this work, we had to fund that elsewhere. Because of the restrictions on the Quimby funds, we were not able to use any of that money toward this effort. So with the controller's audit and so forth, and of course with our own efforts, we looked to see what could we do, but we had to look elsewhere and we had to identify funds elsewhere in our department budget in order to be able to put this together.
And how long has this been available?
I believe we published our first report in March of 2008. Was our first quarterly report.
And in terms of the controller's audit, any items on there? So you continue to work with the controller's office on the recommendations. Any items in there that you disagree with, or you would think that you're not going to be able to fulfill in terms of the recommendations?
I don't believe so. I mean, one of the items is that the department lacks a comprehensive plan. The planning for our department has been over the years has been basically driven by Proposition K. I mean, Proposition K is the most extensive plan for improvements at parks and adding parks that the city has had. So there really was a plan, but what we're really lacking is a master plan for the park system, and Quimby can't be used to pay for that. So what we're doing now is we're researching with the completion of the needs assessment, which you're about to hear about, and the fact that we've done a complete infrastructure assessment of the condition of all of our facilities, in the park system. We basically have the building blocks for a master plan, but right now we're basically looking at what it's going to take to get us there, how much money we're going to need to do that. Where would we get money like that? Our research so far has basically shown from other large cities that have done it, they've basically done it through donations and philanthropy and philanthropists or type organizations who've basically funded plans like that. So. Anyway, we got a ways to go on that, but the master plan is really the comprehensive plan. You can't simply have a comprehensive plan for Quimby. Number one, Quimby's always in flux. It changes every year. There's new collections. So you're constantly, and you don't know where those developments are going to be all the time. I mean, you can basically see maybe in a year where you're going, but who knew that we were going to collect all that money and spike, and then all of a sudden, and now we're just in the exact opposite where we were, 2 years ago. So. That might be the only difficult one, meeting that, but I think our idea is to eventually get a master plan for the park system.
Well, at this time, I want to open it up for questions either from Mr. Zine, and we do have a public comment, then we'll go to the needs assessment, or would you rather cover the needs assessment now? Let's open it up, and then we'll come back to the needs assessment and get a report on that. So, Mr. Zine, any questions?
I just have a question on that 2-mile requirement, and what are they looking at when they're talking about expanding it? Are they looking at 5 miles, 10 miles? What are they discussing?
The only discussions that really have taken place through the needs assessment, we and I'm going to, Camille, if you wouldn't mind making your way up to the desk here. Through the needs assessment process, we basically, in a survey, we asked the residents of Los Angeles, how far would you travel to a different type of park, to a regional park, to a community park? That's where we're trying to create a nexus. And basically, I think it stops at about 3 miles, about how far people would travel. We didn't presume how far, we just simply asked them how far they thought they would travel. that's probably what we're going to be used to drive this. One of the arguments that we make is that some parks may, by size, may not be a community-type park and may be, by definition, a neighborhood park, but in reality, they are community parks. I mean, people will travel, to these smaller parks just because the city is in desperate need of open space and parks. So Councilman, we're not completely done with that, but I think 3 miles is about as far as people may want to travel.
What about using that in coordination with LAUSD?
Park
facilities?
We absolutely are. That's actually a very, very important piece, is that some of the holes in the park system are being fulfilled through joint use. And we have a whole other effort on joint use. We've probably the best relationship we've had with LAUSD in probably our histories. We meet with them regularly. We have a number of joint use projects underway and have been planning with the mayor's office and the council offices on many areas of the city. The best one that I can use as an example is in Green Meadows Park in South Los Angeles. That we have basically a street that we're going to vacate between a park, and they're going to build a new high school. And when that high school is built, you won't see the difference between the park and the school. That's the type of opportunities we're looking for, because we've basically tripled the size of that park. And we're going in, this facility was designed through meetings with Recreation and Parks so that we knew that we could get community access after hours. One of our biggest problems with doing joint use with LAUSD is on schools that are existing where the thought process never was to have access after hours. So there's been a major shift in how we do business on
We're trying to do one out in the West San Fernando Valley at El Camino High School, a joint use project, and we were told, because we have a lot of money kept out of Westfield,
right,
and out of the Warner Center area, and there's sufficient funds, but the problem was the 2 mile radius, I should say.
That's correct.
I think 3 mile would work, but 2 mile wouldn't work.
Yeah, if it was too far, right. That's our own.
You're aware of that one?
I was invited by your office to go to that first meeting out there, and I was the one that brought the bad news. So yeah,
was it 3 miles?
I'm not sure at the distance, but I know that there's not enough money. There was roughly about, I think, if memory serves me right, it was about $40,000 available within 2 miles. So very limited funding could go to that facility. And we used our GIS system to check that.
Because LAUSD we're going to do 50-50.
Right.
And then have the field open up around the clock.
Yeah, and that's possible. We can use Quimby for joint use opportunities as long as we have an executable joint use agreement.
And what about Prop K? Could we combine Quimby and Prop K for a project?
Absolutely, we do it all the time.
Okay, all right, thank you.
A couple of follow-up questions on this on my end. So the 5-year when would the master plan be completed?
Well, we're actually we just reported on the needs assessment to our Board of Commissioners last month, and the commitment that I made to our board was to report back to them in 3 months with a strategy and plan of how we may go about putting a framework together for a master plan and what we thought that might cost. At that point, then we would begin to strategize on how we would fund such an endeavor. We definitely want to make sure that the outreach effort on that is significant. We want to make sure that we involve organizations like LAUSD. We want to involve nonprofit organizations, People for Parks, Los Angeles Land Trust, all those sorts of organizations to be part of that effort. But we're just now starting to put that together. But you're probably, I'm guessing you're looking at probably over $1 million effort and probably at least a couple of years to complete.
Okay.
What about a project like a YMCA where they want to join up and utilize the facility for the community on a field? Would that be appropriate for an organization?
On Rec and Parks property or on
YMCA property, but utilizing Prop K or Quimby funds?
It gets a bit tricky when we don't own the property. You're spending Quimby money on it. The city attorney's here. If I speak out of turn, I'm sure they'll.
Well, he won't say anything.
My understanding is that, and I could use joint use with LAUSD as an example. We will use Quimby money on school property as long as we have an existing joint use agreement there. Okay. That at least the term of that agreement is at least as long as the lifespan of the improvements or the investment that we're putting into it.
Okay.
And that's,
what about an organization like the Y?
I think it would apply to either way as long as we have a use of the facility in.
For example, a soccer field,
mm-hmm.
where it would be on Y property. with the funding by?
I believe it's possible.
Okay. All right, thank you. Right, Pete?
May be possible.
There you go.
You have to have an interest that's long enough to amortize the
Right.
investment.
Okay. Well, we're going to amortize you.
My final question on this is, I think Councilwoman Hahn once talked about getting Quimby-like fees for market rate apartments. Your thoughts on that, or where are we with that?
Yeah, that's actually part of the code update
That's part of the code
that
update.
is part of the code update. Yes.
And how about looking at the overpayments and the process of changing the way Quimby rates are established? That's part of the code update as well.
Well, actually, that's a separate process. Planning has already corrected the problem there was with the charging of those fees, and we've actually started the refund process on that already.
Okay, all right.
Good job. You're
Thank
pretty
you.
knowledgeable. Mr. Muckry should be happy with you, even though he's not here himself.
I believe he's at the doctor.
Okay, we'll excuse him then. So that's we have some public comment on this item, but why don't we first take up the needs assessment, and then we'll go to public comment item 3 and 4.
I'm going to ask Camille Wallace to.
And by the way, we're gonna continue items 2 and 3 just to get a follow up on some of the controller's recommendation, and we'll come back to this as a committee to look at this in the future. I think there's been some progress being made, but hopefully we'll get an update on these 2 items in the future as well. So okay.
Absolutely, Camille.
I will pass out some reports.
Just gonna hear this needs assessment stuff. Head out wherever you want.
Cool. Joe, you want to take this?
Be in the Valley by 5. I got a radio interview at 4.
I know we've been here a long time, so we'll try to be brief on the needs
Yeah,
assessment.
we've got other meetings we've got to get to.
I mean, the needs assessment was, again, an endeavor that this is at least in our knowledge, the second time the department has undertaken such an effort. But it was a very comprehensive community input process on talking to the citizens of Los Angeles on basically what they thought we needed to do to improve the park system, and their thoughts and how we organized the information that we gathered is in some of the documents that you're looking at. And I'll let Camille talk about some of the details.
Is this part of the RV knock?
No, actually, the RV knock process is part of Proposition K.
That's different.
It's different.
Right,
Okay.
right. If you'll look at the, my name is Camille Walls, Recreation and Parks Department, Planning and Development. If you'll look at the report that you have before you, one of the first things that the department needed to do, and we did this with our consultant team of Mearlair and Associates and Pros Consulting, is we wanted to determine the needs, the key issues, and from that determine priorities, recommendations, options, and strategies. It's a community-driven process. We had an advisory council of outside stakeholders, a department working group, an interdepartmental group. We did infrastructure and program assessments. We had a blog. We had a website. We had a youth conference. We had 26 key person interviews, 24 focus group meetings, and 23 public workshops, all throughout the city. We had a park tour that was conducted by the consultant team, and we also had a statistically valid random survey that was mailed to 14,000 households, and we received approximately 3,000 back completed. Overall perception, safety is an issue, communication is an issue, inequitable distribution is an issue, insufficient funding is an issue, great diversity of programs and facilities, and the community is passionate about its parks. There is a great cultural diversity, and special events and festivals are one of the recommendations that came out of this report. The mailed survey had some key findings. Walking and biking trails are most important facilities, followed by neighborhood parks and large community parks. Adult fitness and wellness programs, special events, festivals, youth swim programs, and senior programs are among the most important programs. Opportunities do exist to grow programs at parks and recreation facilities. Again, talking about the mileage issue, which you had asked about, Councilman, we did ask that question, and a little over 50% of the respondents would be willing to travel 3 miles or more for a community park. Reasons that prevented participation, the most commonly cited reasons were they did not know what is being offered and security. Going on, you'll see some graphs and charts about the most important facilities, the most important programs. This is according to the survey. If you look at the bottom of those charts, you'll see the highest unmet need for facilities are walking and biking trails, indoor pools, indoor fitness and exercise facilities, indoor tracks, and small neighborhood parks. The highest importance of programs are adult fitness and wellness programs, special events, festivals, and so on. In addition, the key survey findings talked about ways that the public would think of to fund actions to improve the system. And they wanted more trails, more neighborhood parks, more community parks, more shelters and picnic areas, more nature programs, more family programs, more special events. Recommendations included, interestingly enough, upgrading parks, fixing up and repairing existing park buildings, purchasing land for neighborhood parks, upgrading existing athletic fields, fixing up and repairing existing swimming pools are some of the most important actions. Some of that the department is already doing. Over 70% of the respondents would vote in favor or might vote in favor of a bond referendum to help fund parks, trails, green space, and recreation facilities. The needs assessment in general, which consisted of the focus group meetings, the workshops all over the city, surveys, and so forth, came up with a combination of community needs and community priorities. And that's the rankings that you see on 2 of the pages that talks about the facility priority ranking and the program priority ranking. I'll just read through some of the priority program. Again, adult fitness, special events, nature programs, walking, biking groups, family programs, art, dance, and performing arts, youth swim, water fitness, senior programs, adult sports programs, youth sports programs. Those are among the highest that people are talking about. The guidelines, we are underserved in almost every area throughout the city, but especially in neighborhood and community parks with less than 1 acre per 1,000. The city's standard is 2 acres for short-term and medium-term, and then 4 acres per 1,000. So we are very much underserved, as well as in terms of all of our amenities. Key issues. Key issues are that the city and the department needs a balance of park types, that parks are overused on the weekends, that there's a lack of equitable and adequate neighborhood and community parks, that the amount of parkland is low for population density, that there is no interconnected trail network and could be more trails in city parks. Again, some of these key issues sound negative, but they are actually opportunities. If parks are overused on the weekends, then during the weekday, it's an opportunity that the department can explore to grow some programs there. Key issues in terms of design and maintenance, overall park maintenance needs to be addressed. Natural areas need additional maintenance. There's a lack of youth and adult sports fields. Again, that's a priority as well as an opportunity. Some existing parks are outdated in design. Again, it's an opportunity to redesign parks. Lack of new design standards that we need to customize parks for the neighborhood. Safety concerns and lack of visible security resonate in all different areas of the city. Lastly, pros consulting enforced very much so customizing recreation and park systems by planning area, We have 7 planning areas in the city, and the department agrees with that approach. To undertake a marketing and awareness campaign, to establish funding strategies, and to remove unused amenities and replace with community-desired amenities. Acquire needed lands, seek to ask voters for a major bond issue, to add especially new neighborhood parks in underserved areas. And that is, in a very brief nutshell, a very long 100-page report that is available online, as well as an executive summary at www.laparks.org. And you can click on the Community Citywide Needs Assessment Project, and that will lead you into the report itself. We also have hard copies of the report as well as diskettes available at this meeting.
Thank you. And so this was more of a survey type assessment. Now,
It was. There was a tremendous community outreach component, but it also was an infrastructure evaluation, a recreation program assessment, demographic analysis. There was GIS mapping.
The majority of the time that was spent on the community outreach. The survey was actually a small portion of it because it was the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
But we spent an enormous amount of time with the 23 workshops coordinating that through each council office and in every area of the city,
right,
and getting those planned and making sure you get great, as much participation. That's what the effort was.
For example, El Sereno Park, I know there's some community building that was used for different. It's a multi-purpose building. It's dilapidated, falling apart.
Yep.
Through this needs assessment, we would know that at El Sereno Park, for example, there is a need to refurbish and redo that building.
Well, I mean that's part of our infrastructure. I mean, we knew
That's
that
part of the infrastructure.
The community may have said that during the meeting, but that we already knew that building was in need of either demolition or major renovation.
So every park now we could come to the needs assessment and find out what are the improvements that need to be made, or is that some other document?
No, well, what we did is the infrastructure assessment is a separate document. This document was simply, what does the community feel we need to do to improve? And then the department on its own separate document said, well, what's the condition of our existing facilities? And then you start looking and comparing. It's like, well, these become basically the building blocks for how you're going to plan on what improvement. What does the community want? And what's the condition of what you have?
Okay.
And that's kind of where we're trying to drive a planning process to make sure that, like, for example, when we're spending Quimby money, or in today's times where budget's tight, are we spending our money on the right programs and the right things? And if we're not, this document will help guide us to make sure that we do.
But now, what's the next step? How do you decide where to actually spend it, and what are the priorities? Are you going to be driven by this needs assessment with
the needs assessment is definitely going to help guide us make some of the decisions. I know, and interestingly enough, in your district, council member, we've been working with your staff on a number of fitness zones and fitness areas. It was one of the highest things across the board in every aspect. So I mean that just validates, at least in your district, we knew that's a smart way of spending some of this money.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, it's going to help us tremendously. When people ask about certain types of activities, will this work? Well, we know it'll work.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any questions?
That's good.
Thank you. We're going to go to public comment now. And first speaker is Zoe Rawson. Zoe Rawson here? Not here? Oh, there you are, Zoe. Zoe Rawson from the City Project. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'll be quick. My name is Zoe Rawson. I'm here on behalf of the City Project, really just to call the committee's attention to a Public Records Act request that we made to Recreation and Parks and the Mayor's Office in July of 2008. Related to the Quimby quarterly report, specifically asking for in electronic format, the spreadsheet file that was used to prepare specified tables, and I have a copy of the request for you, in the report, as well as the GIS shapefile in electronic format. We haven't received a response from Recreation and Parks other than it's their policy not to supply documents in electronic format. However, if they exist in electronic format, the law requires them to comply with the request. So, our purpose is to address some of the concerns that were raised here, allocating resources, planning and implementation in a way that addresses the community's needs. And although we use this as a very last resort, we will be seeking these documents through litigation if necessary. And I just wanted to call your attention to that matter.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Clyde Williams. And Clyde, you're also scheduled to speak on this item and also public comment. Right. Welcome.
My name is Clyde Williams. I live at 4115 Barrett Road in El Sereno. We've been watching, in the Neighborhood Council, we have been watching the Quimby funds. And in point of fact, 1/10% of the Quimby funds were provided. Is that the end of it? Or?
No, I think we are continuing the previous.
Okay. We're concerned about the collection, yes, and then especially the spending of it. We understand that the Quimby funds can only be used for capital improvements, whereas operation and maintenance has always been the problem in LA. We have seen for the last 30 some odd years, LA has been deficient in especially neighborhood parks, where people can really identify their house with a particular park. In El Sereno, this is very much of a problem. In fact, many people would probably prefer to have 100 pieces of Ascot Park spread out through the community rather than in one location. And as far as the rest of it, I'm concerned that Parks and Rexon Park can't follow things. They have a lease agreement right now with the Autry National Center. For 20 years, they have not audited it. They have not required the submittals that were supposed to be submitted by the Autry. At every change or modification of the facility, there was supposed to be an approval by the Rexon Park. So how can we expect Rexon Park to deal with $120 million? They can't even keep a lease agreement where it's no cost to them, and they are now considering approval of an expansion of Autry and a change of the current lease agreement. So we don't understand how they can audit, track anything, because they've not practiced good auditing procedure, good tracking procedures for 20 years with the Autry National Center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. On these items, item 2 and 3, we will continue for a progress report in about make that 90 days. 90 days. And item number 4 was discussion item, so we'll note and file that report. And that concludes our meeting. We have one public comment from Clyde Williams. And was that your testimony, or should get an additional 2 minutes?
I'm used to 1 minute each.
Okay.
The lease agreement with the Autry National Center, Rexon Park. This is audit and government efficiency. Where has been the auditing for the last 20 years for the Autry? Excluding the merger agreement with Southwest Museum, just the lease agreement. We understand that a new lease agreement has been formed and has been submitted to the attorney, although we've never seen or heard of it officially. We don't know what's going on. I presume that there will be a condition in the new lease agreement which will say all of the previous non-compliance violations of the previous agreement shall be forgiven, whereas there is a default statement in the original agreement. Where has Rexon Park been auditing, been enforcing the agreements that they have, even to the extent of $1 a year has not been paid by the Autry National Center? Maybe they don't have the money. We cannot verify their documents because they have not submitted their annual reports, their tax returns, their accounting procedures to the Recs and Park. And Recs and Park, more importantly, have not required them. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting for governmental efficiency, audits of governmental efficiency. Thank you.